Welcome back to the Shop Mini RC, everybody. I'm Ken, and today we've got something cool here. We had kind of previewed it a little bit before on like Instagram and Facebook, probably a YouTube post, but not video. Maybe one of our channel member only videos we showed them off, I think. We did actually. Anyway, these are the Mofo X15s, guys. Boom. These are the billet X15s, and these are the V2s. Couple little minor updates between the V1 and the V2s. The V1s had kind of stripes going along them, tiger stripes, as they've been called. So they looked a little different. I personally prefer the ones without the stripes. I definitely like a cleaner look there. These axles are very sharp looking, unlike my Focus right now. What is going on? These guys, full billet aluminum. They are also offered in a nylon, which is very cool if you're looking for nylon axles. Some people prefer nylon just because it slides better on rocks. It doesn't get as beat up. But we like the durability and a little bit extra weight that the billets provide. There is also a whole slew of brass upgrades you can get, which we're going to probably have to get at some point. We'll try to show those off to you, what different brass options are for different upgrades. Pretty sure there's C-hubs and knuckles and the obvious stuff. Another difference between the V1s and the V2s, the V1s required 1.6 millimeter bolts. So they came with a whole bunch of different little ball ends for your links and whatnot. Hopefully your links was able to use those ball ends. If you didn't have like custom links that had different size ball joints, you might have been in trouble there, but they used 1.6s, but all this has been taken back to the 1.4s. So that's also nice. I get that the 1.6 is a little bit more durable, but man, what a pain in the butt to switch everything around and not really backwards compatible. It's just the 1.4s are kind of the standard as far as the hardware is concerned. So it makes sense to go back to the 1.4. And I don't know if they did that on purpose or if it was just part of a production run error. Not totally sure there. I've heard both. So who knows? Either way, the V2s are where it's at. That's what we've got here. So we're going to check these guys out. We are going to throw them on this guy here. This is kind of one of our class 1-ish rigs. It's widened out, but we're using just hex wideners, which is not good for your scrub radius, right? It means you have a lot of scrub. Scrub is kind of based on where your knuckle hinge point is compared to the center of your tire. You can see there's a big distance there. You can offset things like these hex extenders by having, offset wheels. If you put a negative offset on your wheel, it'll bring your mounting point in and push your wheels out. A positive offset in your wheels will bring the mounting point to the outside and pull your wheel in. So you'd want a positive offset on these guys to try to get your wheels to kind of almost take back up that space. But again, you're narrowing it up. So I don't know. It's kind of a balance between getting a wider rig, but then also not having scrub steer. One thing nice about wider axles like the X15s, they're wider naturally, right? Like the whole axle shaft, the whole axle is actually wider, not just wider out here. So that way you're pushing your pivot point on your knuckles and your C-hubs out towards the wheels. So if we look at this, you can see the actual axle housing is wider. Now these guys are an extra 15 millimeters wide compared to a stock axle. And I don't remember what size hexes we put on here, but I'm hoping that this is basically the same width. We're not going to be changing our width too much at all here. I believe these are plus 5 or 7 millimeter hexes. So if they're plus 7s, that's an extra 14 millimeters, which means we'll actually be a little wider. They could be plus 8s, and then we'll be a millimeter more narrow. That's possible, which I'd be okay with, as long as we don't get too narrow, because I like the way this guy sits nice and flush with our fenders. So I'm hoping that's going to be fine. There's a lot of other really cool things about these axles. The diff covers, or the pumpkins, are free of all bolts and mounting hardware. So it's all on the rear. That way you're nice and smooth here. It's angled to help with, your approach, hitting those rocks. So this rear diff cover comes off. And then on this guy, it's the opposite, though. Your hardware is here, so you could theoretically still kind of skid across the rocks. But either way, it's still a lot smoother design, real low profile, so that's nice. And again, changeable C-hubs. So if you wanted to put like a portal kit conversion on here, if they ever made one, you could just pop your C-hubs off, put something new on, put brass C-hubs on. I like that is modular. Same back here. There's also the trusses just for extra cool factor and I guess strength. If you happen to drop your truck like we dropped the axle, it would maybe help prevent the axle from actually bending. You would probably end up still bending on the shaft here if you had a bad enough fall. But again, it looks cool. Does come with the steering links, obviously. They are kind of raised. I don't know if you can see that. It's hard to tell on camera, but you can kind of see that the steering link raises up to help give you extra clearance in the front. So that's nice. I'm wondering if that means they've also raised the servo mount a little bit. They probably have, just to give you clearance on your links. So my guess is this is very similar to the BSME, the best servo mount ever. And the links are going to be nice and flat there. Kind of dropped down so your servo can sit nice and flat, sitting on top of the links. And then this guy will just mount right on top. One of the things I do not like about this design is if you ever wanted to change your mount, right? If you needed a different servo mount for some reason, and most of the time you're not going to need a different servo mount. This servo mount's going to be fantastic. It's got full adjustability as far as forward and back, so you can move your servo depending on how deep you need your servo to be for clearance on the rig and whatnot. There's no height adjustment, but usually you can adjust your height by shimming underneath these little ears. If you need to raise it, you can put a shim. And actually, we did that here on this guy. You can see we've got little shims. They're actually servo horns that we chopped and then painted them black so you couldn't see them as much, but they are raising our servo. And the reason we needed to raise our servo is because back in here, the servo was hitting on our link because of this type of servo tray. Okay, so the best servo mount ever definitely helps resolve that, which is nice, but it does lift your servo up, which raises your center of gravity a tad. But again, you're getting full clearance on your rear links. So good. Even on the regular best servo mount that attaches to a regular axle. But I do wish these had traditional servo mounts, I guess is what you would call it, ears, tabs, whatever. Just because if you wanted to use something like the 3Flow 9 micro servo rear, where they're using the Torrent servo, or the Cascade, excuse me, which is the very small servo for lighter weight, and it uses a specialized servo mount. That servo mount's designed to go on a stock axle, and you would not be able to use it on the X15 here at all. Not without some major modification. Even then, I don't know if you could actually make it work. You might be able to tap out some holes in the bottom of that other servo mount, take off the whole mounting, but it's a lot of work. But you could, I mean, you can almost always do anything with enough effort. Anyway, I wanted to show this. What else do we got to do here? Oh, so these guys come completely dry. There's no lube in here at all. And we're going to have to open them up and lube it all up, get some nice grease in there, and then Loctite all of the screws that are going metal into metal, which is going to be every screw in this thing. So we're going to open them up, show you the inside, grease them up, Loctite it, and then we'll get them installed on this rig. One last thing to point out, as far as accessories or things that come with, it does come with our little brass hexes and some wheel nuts here, which these are not nylock nuts. So you will need to Loctite these when you put them back on, or use some supplied nylock nuts. Now, these guys are these are bigger than your standard SCX24. They're a beefier axle. Go ahead and pull this guy out. And we'll show you. So it looks like we're at 2.5 millimeter ish, 2.37, 2.4 millimeter axle shaft. And you compare that to a stock SCX24 axle shaft, we're down to basically 2 millimeter versus 2.5. Okay, so it's a little bit thicker axle shaft, which is good because it's extra durability, but it does mean you need to have that size nut. Okay, it's basically an M2.5. Is that what that would be? M25? Yeah. So M25 nut. Just wanted to verify for you guys that everything was standard. And then on the rear axle, you've got this nice little built-in link riser, which is very cool as well. Again, it's permanently affixed. It is built in, so if you needed to do something different for some reason, needed a wider or a more narrow or a taller, or wanted to run a super low sort of link setup, you will have to deal with this. I'm sure there are ways you could accommodate for whatever you're trying to do, but again, this is built in. But one nice thing is it's one less thing to fall apart or have issues with. As far as screws, if screws back out and you lose your link, your screws on the trail. This is all part of that axle. Now, again, the downside is if you happen to strip this out or something happens, you break a nut off, a bolt off up in there, there's no replacing it. It's part of the axle housing. So that is the downside to having it permanently affixed, kind of similar to this here, right? Just keep it in mind though, but it does come with a link riser, and that's awesome because you're able to adjust basically your anti-squat settings and link geometries. And I do like that it's narrow. If you want to widen it up, you're always able to put spacers in there, but ideally your mounting point here would be very narrow. You kind of want to triangulate to a narrow point on this upper link section. So being narrow is good. So I approve of that. Definitely how you'd want it set up. All right, I'm going to get this all cleaned up, and then we are going to move on to opening these guys up. All the hardware on this is 1.5 millimeter for your hex driver. Well, yeah, I believe all of it, even this. These are not Phillips, so that's good. Yeah, those are also 1.5s. Got bearings and everything. No bushings or anything crazy like that. Full ball bearing set, so that's good. Alrighty, there's the insides. So it's a steel worm gear with the brass lower gear or pinion gear, main drive gear, whatever you want to call it. And these are underdriven. Okay, this setup is an underdrive setup, so it's 50% slower than a standard gear setup. Okay, standard SCX24s are going to be 50% faster. So this is really going to get you a ton more torque. I really like that they did the setup this way, basically underdrive in front and in rear, which is freaking awesome. And we've all got stock, ring and pinion sitting around, or worm gear, drive gears and main gear. We've all got stock ones sitting around, and there's tons of aftermarket out there for it. And this will use all that aftermarket standard ring and pinion, or worm gear and pinion, or worm gear and ring. Jeez. But yeah, nice and smooth in there. You can see our bearings are in there nice. Let's go ahead and we're going to take the whole thing apart, because again, we're going to have to Loctite all these screws anyway. So I'm just going to take the whole thing apart. Now the tolerances on this whole diff housing are super, super precise. You're not running any O-rings inside the, the output shaft bearing or any of that kind of stuff. Everything just fits nice and perfect. So that's good. Again, a lot on stock axles or not as well machined axles, you're going to have to run O-rings just to make sure your mesh is as well, and you don't have a bunch of play and slop and binding in there. So I definitely dig that. They seem super, super smooth. And these axle shafts here are freaking beefy, guys, like way beefy. Let's measure this real quick. Almost 4 millimeters. On Mofo's site, he mentions that they're basically the 1 ton equivalent in the 24 scale. Basically, all stock axles are half tons. These guys are 1 tons. They're huge. So the weak point on these axles now so it actually doesn't really matter how thick your axle is here, because the thinnest part of the axle is going to be your weak point, and that's where it'll break. So theoretically, this could be the same thickness as this here, because basically our weak point is going to be right here at the pin, where the pin goes through, okay, because that's where the actual rotational force is going to come from. Your threaded area here, not a big deal. You can keep that small, which is what he's done. It's still bigger than stock, but it's not huge. You want to be able to fit a bunch of different types of wheels, so you don't want to have to use too big of a nut. The nut it uses is a 4 millimeter. If you go too much bigger, a lot of wheels won't fit. So that makes sense. But this is basically going to be your point, your weak link, basically. Not the saying this is weak, that's a wrong way to put it, because this is not weak by any stretch, but this is going to be your weakest point, right? Here and then here. This point here, where it actually keys into your gear. Okay, so that's pretty much your true point of failure. It's going to be right there. So we're still looking at our 3 millimeters on that. And then what do we got here? The 3.5. So realistically, inside here, 3 millimeters, that's going to be your weak point. Okay. which is kind of the same standard as the stock, just to be honest, right? Because these are stock. So you could theoretically brake on the outside, especially on the fronts. It's a little different, right? On the fronts, you have all the rotational force, kind of a ton of it going into the actual CVDs and in this portion here. So having this beefier is going to be a huge deal. On the rears, not so much. You could still just brake inside here, but you almost never see rear axles brake, so whatever. But it's a balance, right? Because if you were to make this beefy up in here and try to maintain that same diameter or close to what here, then all of your main drive gears, they don't work, right? So again, there's always trade-offs. I like the design. I like what he did here. One nice thing about getting a larger shaft too, though, is you do allow yourself some larger bearings. And larger bearings are going to be nice and smooth compared to smaller bearings. The bigger the bearing, the better it's going to handle weight and pressures and forces. So again, that's a good reason to have this larger portion here to be able to use larger bearings. Just because bearings come standardized. You could use still a smaller shaft and then find bearings that have larger inners and larger bearing races and whatnot, and that would potentially be even better. But again, I don't know. I'm not the materials and physics expert here. So I don't know. I'm just going off of logic. Anyway, let's go ahead and get this guy greased up, and then we'll work on the front. I'm actually going to go ahead and just Loctite up the shafts here and get this all back together. Then we'll grease her up. Remember, don't over tighten things. That's what the Loctite's for. Just get it nice and snug, and you're good. Let the Loctite do what it's supposed to do, which is hold everything together. Over tightening just is going to cause you issues, headaches, potential breakages. And on axles like these, you don't want to break a screw head off inside there. That'd be bad times for sure. For our lube, we're going to use some 2,4-C with PTFE marine grease, Quicksilver. There's plenty of other options. I know a lot of people like Cow RC Utter Butter, but I mean, I think they're all very similar, or at least accomplish the same goals, right? They may be different in their compositions, but I like that this is designed for marine use as well. So, you know, if you do get water in there, hopefully it'll prevent some corrosion and whatnot. And it seems to work really well for us. We use it all the time. If you've got something better that you really like and you feel like there's a reason that your choice is better than most, why don't you put that down in the comments and let us know your thoughts, what you'd like to share with the world as the best lube grease for these little guys, or even the big guys. Doesn't really matter. We do like to lube these up very well. Get plenty in there. Make sure that we're not dry at all. And then we're going to go ahead and throw our cover on and Loctite her down. Yeah, that fitment is nice. You can just kind of hear it snap in. That's the tolerances being like perfect. Remember, worm gears don't generally, I was just checking to see, because some gear ratios, usually it's when it's a higher ratio, allowing yourself to get a lot of wheel speed. They'll let you kind of spin at the axle with worm gears, but because these guys are underdriven, there's no way. So just be aware of that. You can't just roll the axles. They're not supposed to spin from the wheel side. Okay. All right, we're gonna get our other bolts in. We'll open at the front. Okay, we're all back together now. I did want to point this out. There is a little bit of play in the axle. I can feel the axle shafts hit onto each other in the center here. They're basically sliding in and doing one of these numbers, right? But even with them both pushed all the way in, you do have a little bit of side-to-side play. Not much. Probably about the same as what a stock axle would have, would be my guess. But you can, well, and that depends on your hexes, right? If your wheel hexes, those little tabs down in there, right down in there, if they happen to push up against the bearings, and this is all the way tight, right? I tighten these all the way down, so the hexes are sitting on the axle shaft pins, which is what you want. That's good. But if your hex ears or tabs are too far away from the bearing, you get this play, right? So I can like hold this side, and you can see there's play on one side, and there's the play on the other. Okay. But those ears usually kind of ride on the bearings, and a lot of people will over tighten those on stock axles and cause binding. So it's good. You'd rather have it like this than to be binding. But if you want to get rid of that slop, you could put a washer in there, or even just a little tiny rubber O-ring, and that would help reduce some of that slop. And it would ride on the bearing race anyway, so you wouldn't have any binding or extra resistance, especially with like a washer or shim. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. Let's move on to the fronts. So right off the bat here, we do have a different size screw. Our link screw here is going to be a 1.3 millimeter driver. And then I also noticed while I was just kind of checking the kingpins here, or these are actually shoulder screws. I believe they're also 1.3. Yeah, they're also 1.3. Depending on your driver, it might be an 050. 1.3 and 050 are almost the exact same size. 050 is just slightly smaller. So if you've got some very, let's check our MIP. We have an MIP 1.3, which is going to be pretty much the tightest. Let's see, does it fit in that? No problem. Oh yeah, you got to kind of work it in there. So it's probably actually a 050 inch driver hex head in there, is my guess. It doesn't say anywhere on the website, but that does seem to fit a little better. And if you've got a tight tolerance driver like a MIP or something, you're probably going to want to use the 050. A sloppy 1.3 would work well. This one's pretty tight. I just didn't want to force it, so I just want to point that out. So these little shoulder screws, they're pretty small, which does worry me. That is a tiny screw. Curious the size of that. Oof, like 1.3. Is that basically an M4 or M14? Yeah, so it's an M14 size screw, which is interesting. They chose to go with that versus a beefier screw here in the knuckle, because that's a place that would likely break, right? So I'm surprised they didn't go with a 1.5 there, or even a 2 millimeter, to be honest. And especially since the screw is kind of floating in there. Kind of? No, I guess not. Well, we'll see. We'll see over time the durability of these screws. But it is using a shoulder screw, which basically the screw will go down onto the knuckle here. And here, once we get the knuckle out, I'll show you. Oh, let's pull the knuckle completely off, and then I can show you. See, and you can see that play in there as well. Just a little bit. Not a ton, but there is just a little bit. Anyway, so yeah, these shoulder screws, instead of using a bushing in the C-hub, will basically screw all the way down. And then they kind of have that spacer in there, or spacing in there, that allows them to kind of ride on the C-hub. Okay, so that's a cool design. You don't have to worry about losing your little bushings and whatnot. I definitely dig that. Man, they're just 1.3s, huh? They went and beefed everything up except for that. Should be okay, though. We'll see. So you should be able to tighten down these screws pretty well. Again, you won't have to tighten them down if you're using some Loctite. Don't over-tighten them. Don't want to break them. They are just 1.3 millimeters in diameter, an M14. All right. And these CVDs, how do they pop out? I guess we have to take off our wheel nut and wheel hex and axle shaft pin. Don't lose these little guys. And this should just slide right out. These look very similar to the TRX4Ms. And like I said, by having a larger CVD like this, it means you can use a larger bearing, which means you're going to have smoother operation. This CVD is like 3 times bigger than what an SCX24 CVD is going to be. Also, you should get a ton of turn radius out of this guy. Just be aware that this will come completely apart if you push this pin out. If this pin comes out, your whole CVD comes apart. So just keep that in mind while you're working with these. Again, we're taking this thing completely apart because we want to make sure we Loctite every single screw that's going into metal. which is all of them because these guys are all metal. If you're running the nylon ones, you won't have to Loctite. Do not Loctite the nylon. You'll just destroy your axles. There's no rubber O-rings or anything like that in these ball joints. These guys just kind of sit in there. They do only go one way. So just keep that in mind. Okay. These ones have some O-rings on them though. Alrighty. Do we need to take this apart? No, we don't need to take this apart. I just wanted to show you there. All right, let's go ahead and open up our diff. Oh, actually, we'll put these C-hubs off because I want to Loctite these screws as well. And then we'll open up our diff. Now be aware when you put these back on that you put them on correctly. They should be angling back with your axle facing up, Mofo logo, right? Normal axle, they should be leaning back. A little bit of caster to the rear. Is that caster? It's like kingpin angle. Caster is that rotational direction. I just don't know if it is based on your knuckles, your kingpin here, your kingpin angles, or if it's based on your steering. I'm not sure what caster is based on, what it's actually looking at. I just know it's the rotation on the axle, but there's also kingpin angle, which is part of your C-hub, and the angle of that matters a lot with your steering. So anyway, maybe they're the same. Let me know in the comments below. Educate me. Now, while we're opening this guy up, I think we might try to swap over to just some regular stock SCX24 worm gear and main gear. That way we're underdriven in the rear and overdriven in the front, or whatever. The differentiation between the two. We'll have a 50% underdrive, basically, or overdrive, however you want to look at it. I guess technically, based from stock, it would be the 50% underdrive in the rear, because they're both underdriven. Here we go. I just want to check and make sure there's no O-rings on this guy. Nope, same thing. They're trusting their machining accuracy. All right, cool. All right, so let's get this guy greased up and get it back together. Now, before we grease it up, we're going to go ahead and swap out our gears. These are the gears that came in with the brass main gear and our worm gear. We've got a steel gear here and then another brass gear. Now, to be fair, I'm like 99% sure that the main gears are the same. They're all the same. They look like the angles are the exact same. They're the same tooth count. There's 16 teeth. And all the angles, they look very similar. So I don't think it's going to matter which one we use. Because again, they're all 16 tooth and they're all angled. But the worm gear itself is actually different. And the underdrive gear is going to be more spins to get a full, I guess, push through from one side to the other. So if we were to take this, one way you can tell, take this, you've got your flat portion of your output shaft. You stick a screw head in there. You can count, right? If we rotate, we're going to go one full rotation till the flat part again, and then two full rotations, and we're already out, right, in two rotations. So then we've got the Mofo. We'll go ahead and stick our flat head in there. We'll do one, flat side here. One full rotation. Two full rotations. We're still inside the gear. It's going to take 3 full rotations to get us out. So 3 full rotations is 50% more rotations, which is 50% underdrive. All right, so we're going to go ahead and just use one of the other worm gears and our same brass gear here. We should be totally fine. Again, the spacing, the count, the diameter, it's all the same, so it shouldn't matter. If it starts acting weird, we'll know why. If we had premature wearing, we'll know why. I guess we could just use this. It doesn't matter. Like I said, I'm pretty sure they're all the same. Either way, we'll get the underdrive worm gear in there, and then we'll get greased up, and we'll get Loctited. See, this gear's a little beat up. It came out of an old axle. Yeah, we'll just use the Mofo. Goes in nice and smooth. We're going to put our knuckles and C-hubs and all that on there, and then we'll grease it up because that'll help. This keeping the diff cover off will help us align the axle shafts into there. We'll have to pull on this and whatnot to get the axle shafts to align. So we'll get it all together. Last thing we'll put on is the grease in the diff cover. And then we'll get our steering links on. Then we'll get it on the truck.
A few moments later.
So first things first, we got to get our servo installed and our servo tray. So we'll do that. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out real quick. And yeah, should be fairly easy. We're running a Poor Boys RC servo on this guy. It's stock axles on it, just with wideners. Not ideal. Again, scrub radius, bad. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and pull the whole axle off here. We might even change the shocks. These are just some kind of cheapy friction shocks. I've got some oil filleds. I think some OGRCs or Injoras or something. So we'll probably swap that. This truck originally was just kind of like a parts bin build. And it's slowly just evolving into one of our Class 1 trucks. So it comes with some extra shoulder screws for the knuckles, so that's nice. We've got, like I said before, extra wheel nuts if you want to use standard wheel nuts. I believe these are going to be used for the servo, into the servo ears, and then these are also the servo ears mounts, the bottom parts. I'm not sure what this one is for. Maybe the upper link. There's no hardware for your shocks or your link mounts, your rear truss. You have to use all your stock stuff for that. But yeah, nice that it comes with these. So we have to put the servo tray together on here. And then the last thing we'll do is put the servo in to the this built tray. So first things first, we're going to put our ears on, which kind of sucks because if you need to adjust where your servo is sitting, it's not going to be quite as easy. I think you have to pull the whole thing apart and take your servo off, right? So like if you have to adjust the ears, you have to pull the servo out, and then you can take the servo off the axle, the servo tray off the axle, and then you can adjust your ears versus just pulling the tray and the servo all off, unscrewing it and adjusting your servo. You have to actually pull the servo out. So that kind of sucks. I'm not the biggest fan of that design. With the regular BSM or best servo mount ever, you literally just pull the two screws out, the back or the front, whichever way you put them in, and the whole tray comes off, and then you can adjust forward and backward your servo without having to unmount it. So that kind of sucks. We're probably going to have to mount this and unmount it and remount it and try to figure out where we want our clearance to be, forward or back on our mounts. Looking at our original servo tray, it was all the way forward, so I assume we're going to go ahead and do the same on this. We'll move it all the way forward, and hopefully that'll be good enough. As always, Loctite, Loctite, Loctite. Definitely want to make sure you Loctite these. You don't want to have to over tighten them because they could break off. Again, they're 1.4 M14s, so they're pretty small, but that's again standard on an SCX. And there we go. You can see how the upper link is not going to interfere with our servo, so that's super nice. It's one of the reasons we had to raise this guy up, is because you can see it interferes, right? Putting a full-size servo in there, well, full-size micro servo in there was just rubbing on our links and stuff, so we had to raise it up. But this Mofo servo mount is going to be great. All right, let's go ahead and mount it to our axle here. The screws do mount through the top. Actually, that's what these are for. Not the servo mount, not the servo into the mount, but the servo mount onto the axle. Those guys are a little beefier. Need a 1.5 for that. Don't tighten it all the way down until you get your second screw in. That way you can make sure you're lined up. There's no keying or anything. It'll just kind of slide around. And then once you're in, just snug her up. Okay. looks like will be just about perfect. We'll mount our servo, mount our drag link to our servo horn from behind. This poor boy servo kind of sticks out kind of far. You don't want to mount it like that, too much angle on your drag link. So we'll put it behind. It should be golden. Is there going to be enough there? I just want to make sure the drag link's not going to rub on our actual steering link here. Now we should be good. Great. So I do kind of wish that the ball joints on here were captured ball joints, basically one side larger than the other. So if you were to make this side, this flange, larger so it could not pull through, then you'd be able to put your screw head through here, right? Your screw would go in this way. And if the O-rings ever degraded or broke, your link would not be able to pull through the ball. But unfortunately, these appear to be the same size on both sides, which means if you lose that O-ring, your link's coming off. So I'm not the biggest fan of that. Definitely like the asymmetrical flanges on the ball joints. Because again, if you're mounted like so, that O-ring goes, this guy comes right off no problem. Same with down here on this one. Ideally, this side here would be a larger flange so that it can't pull through. Oh well, we'll see how they work. Servo's all installed. We always like to check, make sure things seem right before we get it all installed and then have to uninstall it to double check again. Let's go ahead and just look at our turn radius here. This guy should have some pretty nutso turn radius, or steering angle, if you will. We maxed out. There we go. Now we got max dual rate. It's pretty nuts. It's going to be good. All right, I'm getting excited. I'm excited. This boy servo is pretty damn good. We're using an BEC here just to make sure we got all the power for it. Should be nice. Let's see how we fit in here now. We might need some trimming. Because our old servo, hold on, what's going on here? Here we go. We should be okay. It's close. It's close. We might have to shave down on here. Maybe not. We didn't really do it on our old ones. These are a little thinner, though. Just barely. Comparatively. They're a little more narrow. Okay. We'll see. Went ahead and decided I didn't want to trim down the servo ears here yet. We might still do it. We'll see how bad we hit. But I went ahead and trimmed out the chassis rails. You can see I just kind of beveled them in because they're a C channel, so I just took off the bottom part of the C. There's no real bracing that happens up here. It's just the bumper, so I'm not too worried about the strength. It's still fine. I mean, these are prettle strong. You still have the top bevel of the C channel to help kind of brace it or give it rigidity. And now we should be able to fit a little bit better in there. A little bit better clearance, at least from the bottom right. We'll see once it's actually mounted in if everything's still good. And we'll go ahead and do that now. Let's get our upper link mount and our drive shaft and our lower links, and then we'll probably put on some, we'll check it and then we'll put on shocks. If you've watched a lot of my other videos, I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but I never know who's watching. So if you're a new person, always phase your drive shafts. Phasing your drive shafts means putting the ears, the tabs on the drive shaft in alignment from here to here. You can also usually do that by aligning your screws. So you can see our screw there. And if we, well, there's the bottom of the screw, so that would work, or flip it. And there's the top of the screw. So as long as that's aligned, again, you just want the tabs on the inner part of the shaft to line up. Helps prevent vibration and binding under extreme articulation. Doesn't make a huge difference on these little guys, other than maybe if you're articulating a ton in the binding. But if you're going fast, or you've got some good drive shaft speed going on there, you could get some vibration and whatnot. So it's just always a good habit to try to make sure your drive shaft is phased. All right, links are all installed. We're running a Y-link just because that's what's been on here, and I don't really want to change it. I don't know. We'll see. I like to try to make it work. It does hit on the drive shaft just almost barely. Maybe not. You can kind of see it it'll wear itself out. That's for sure. We even dremelled down that part of the Y-link right there just a little bit. I could probably take a little bit more off, but it's not actually like hitting. It looks like it is, but maybe the tiniest bit of rub you can see there. But again, it'll be fine. As it articulates, it doesn't really rub. I wish we had a trim on here for throttle, so I didn't have to hold it, because it's hard to show you and hold it with throttle. Here, let's do this. Maybe I can stick something in the throttle. Probably not ideal, but we're going to do it. Can I stick it in the battery? There we go. So even while we articulate, not too bad. You can see it start to hit a little bit. But we're not going to be that far down, so I'm not too worried about it. All of our clearance seems good. We're able to drop all the way down to basically hitting the chassis on the drag link, right here. So that's as low as we can get it, but that's as low as we probably wouldn't even be that low, but we're nice and clear. You just want to check your side to side articulation, make sure there's no crazy binding. Again, that little bit of slowing down, I don't know if you can hear it, but that's the Y-link. That's the drive shaft rubbing on the Y-link. This is why a lot of people go to 4 links, but I want to make the Y-link work. And again, it'll probably wear itself a little bit, and it's not binding like crazy. It's not stopping it. It's just barely rubbing. So we're good. Okay, let's get some shocks on and then do the rear. We might need to take a little bit more off right there. Looks like we're kind of catching. Oh, maybe not. Oh, yeah. Well, no. Yeah, right there. It may not move that much once their shock's on. We'll figure it out once their shock's on how much more we need to take off, if we need to take anything off. Seems good, though. So I've got these OGRC shocks that I really actually like. They're super smooth. The problem is they are quite a bit longer than the shocks I was using. So let me show you full extend, eyelet to eyelet. They are basically 41 millimeter, whereas these little guys, which I really like the length of these things, are 33. So big difference, 33 to 41. Yeah. So the issue is I put them on, and at full droop, you can see there's a huge difference, right? And so full droop meaning fully extended, right? It's fully dropped down. Under compression, it sits about there, which isn't too bad. I could always take these springs down, chop the springs down, and just let it kind of sit. But under natural sitting, it sits like this, right? Because the springs are kind of stiff, so it would be nice to have softer springs for those. And I don't really have any that are that same diameter. Really, I just want shorter shocks. So what I think, and I can't mount the shock any higher. It's at the highest point I could mount it. It actually just kind of tucks and pushes into the body mount screw. And there's not enough material in that mount right there to move the shock up to that little hole and hold this body mount screw in. So that's kind of like my max right now anyway. So I was like, okay, let's get creative. I'm showing you this, guys, for information. You can always skip it. Use the chapters below. I want it like this. I want it where it's pretty much tucked almost all the way in when we're sitting naturally, right? So basically sitting 50% on the spring. It's like that's full compression, that's full extension. I'd like it to sit right there, right between the two, but have the fender gap of this, essentially, right? So unfortunately, we'd be like that, which is just too much in the front. So I was like, okay, let me move the shock down. So I was going to move the shock down to the link mount, right? So you've got the link mount here. I was going to mount the shock here instead of on the shock mount, and that would have been perfect. Problem is, so you can see the difference there. We're mounted here. Quite a bit of difference. In fact, it might have been too short and I would have had to drop my shock mount down just a little bit. It might have been too low. The problem is though, my shock cup, the spring retainer cup hits on the shock mount, the actual shock mount. So I can't get it to go all the way forward like I need it to be able to mount it, right? Like that's as far forward as it'll go. I could Dremel off the shock mount on the axles, which I really, really don't want to do. I could also try cutting out the shock cup a little bit so that it'll go in, but then my spring will sit kind of funny because it'll be sitting on top of the shock mount and not just the spring retainer. So I don't know. It's not really working how I want it to. If I had a mounting position right here, that'd be perfect. I'm not going to deal with trying to make a mounting position right there at this point. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to run just the same springs on the front. Will be not as dampened in the front, right? And then I'm going to run the dampened oil fields in the rear to help kind of reduce the bounce in the rear because I've got a lot of shock mounting positions. I should be able to move that up to here, and that should be enough to get it kind of where I want it sitting. We'll see when I get there. Maybe we'll just end up with these springs on there again, these shocks and springs. I might be able to take these springs off and put them on the OGRCs. These ones are actually, no, they're smaller diameter. Anyway, just wanted to show you that. Another thing that I did here that you might be wondering about, if you've tried to do this before, which this is an awesome way to lower your truck while keeping your travel and your shock, is to mount it here. You do usually have to kind of take off your shock mount here though. And I've done that for axles where the screw has been broken off inside the shock mount and you can't really get it out anyway, so we just chop it off and mount it here. Problem usually is that by the time you go through your ball joint in the shock, your axle, your ball joint, your link, and then where it actually threads, that's more than 12 millimeters. And the biggest screw you can really get on an M14 is 12 millimeters. And you really need like a 13 or 14 millimeter just to get into there a little bit. Well, 3Flow9 has something awesome. They made these link ends, and you can see that one in there. The little ball joint is recessed so that your screw will drop in about 2 millimeters. And you can see our screw is flush. See that? It's dropped down into the ball joint, which is freaking sweet. So if you ever need something like that, then we can just use a regular 12 millimeter screw. It comes in about halfway on this mount. Totally fine. And it works perfect. It's such an awesome thing that nobody's made, but 3Flow did. So you can see it's got about that much of screw that can go in now, which is freaking sweet. Here, bam. Just enough to make it in there and hold it, some Loctite, you're good to go. But yeah, you just got to make sure your ball joints of your shock that you're putting these into will work. We actually did have to mill this out just a tiny bit. 3Flow9's ball joint is, I think, 4.1? 4.14? Yeah, 4.14. And then the shocks that we have here, these OGRCs, I think it was like 3.9. So we had to take out just a little bit on the inside to get the 3Flow9 ball joints to fit. Right in there, you can kind of see. That was easy. We just used the drill bit and just stuck it in there and reamed it out a little until the ball joint fit. And once it fit, we're good to go. So freaking awesome. Huge shout out to 3Flow9 for making a part that is not made by anybody else. That is freaking sweet. Anyway, back to this. Let's get our regular springs back on, and then we'll get on the rear. So even on the back here, where I thought we'd have plenty of mounting positions, and actually these mounts are not for an SCX. They've got like larger screw holes. I don't know where they came from. They're probably TRX mounts that somebody printed and gave to me. I don't know. Anyway, we used them on here and we just put a new hole in. And yeah, it was working. But now that we need to mount them about like this, I don't think it's going to work. So we're going to add some like mount extensions. We're going to take a servo horn. I'm going to cut it in half, some of these doubles. We never use these for anything. And I'm going to mount it right like so. Put 2 screws in there, mount it up like this, and that'll get us some mounting positions up higher and a little more forward. I don't know how we have to be careful because of our body. We'll throw our body on and check, but we got plenty of room in the body. That's not a worry. Plenty of room in there. Good to go. All right. So you don't want to lean them too far forward because then we have too much articulation, and you don't want that much flex, especially in something you're actually trying to compete with. You want controllable. That's what's important. Controllable, and you want to be able to float gaps, right? When there's a dip in the rock or a hole between 2 rocks, you don't want to just drop down into that, which is why you don't want too long of shocks. You don't want too much articulation, because if you're going, you drop into that hole and you're like, whoop, and then you get stuck in that hole. Versus if you had shorter shocks and less articulation, you would literally just float over the hole. All right, let me get this cut up, mounted on here, and then we'll show you. So I know we're on a tangent here, not really axle related, but I wanted to show it anyway. I went ahead and milled this out a little bit so it was inset so that our shocks weren't sitting out crazy out here in a crazy angle. Got the mount on top and then, you know, whatever else, or we're rubbing on here. So I just wanted to try to keep it close to what it was before. So there's our servo horn. I put the screw through all the way at the top so that I can make sure that it's going to be the same height. So I'm just going to rest that on top. Make sure we mount it exactly in the same spot. That way the two sides are symmetrical. And then we're just going to go ahead and screw it in. Should be pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We might have to, if I can't get these to screw into the 3D print, we'll just drill some little holes. No, these should be able to go right in. It's kind of soft. So I think we're going in. Yeah, we're going in. And actually, I don't want to mess up the threading, so I just went ahead and screwed them in just enough to where I could see some marks here and here. We're going to go ahead and use just a tiny drill bit, put little holes just to pilot it, basically, and that'll help us thread versus just strip out as we're trying to push through. Just a little tiny 1 millimeter drill bit. Just want to go straight in. And that'll just make it so that we can easily thread it in. Because the problem is when you're trying to push a screw through, the material gets kind of stuck behind the screw, right? And you just end up stripping and stripping and stripping. So putting a pilot hole is always a good idea. And there we go. See our shock mounts all mounted up. I got extra long screws just in case I needed to put nuts on there. We'll maybe change them out to the correct size at some point or just leave them, whatever, doesn't matter. But you can see we're able to get our shock mounts higher now, so that's good. We put little spacers, like probably a 1 millimeter spacer, just to help move it out a little bit because we were rubbing on the bolt. There's a bolt underneath here. I don't know if you can see it right there. Yeah, our spring was kind of rubbing on that just a little, so I wanted to space it out a tad more on the bottom and get them more straight. You want them straight. You don't really want them leaning too much, especially like that. You don't want them like that. Worst case like this. The idea is that the shock shaft is moving straight in and out. Okay, that's the least amount of binding. So we're nice and smooth and buttery. Hopefully it's low enough. Worst case, we might take a coil or two out of the spring just to drop it just a little bit. We can always preload it back if we need to. But hopefully once we have our body on there and it's sitting, we'll sit a little flat. Let me just check. And I know we've gotten away from the axles, but I figure while we're in there, we might as well kind of get things tuned up a little bit better than what we had. Keep the tires on, see where we sit. So sad. We just found that the inside, I don't think you're gonna be able to see it very well, but those bolts inside of our wheels are gonna be hitting just barely on the bearing retainer bolts. Let me spin my motor here. You can see it. I'm trying to spin the motor and it's just hitting on that bolt right there. So on this side, we went ahead and put a little spacer, just some M2.5 washers. Worst case, 1 or 2 washers should be golden. So we'll go ahead and pop this guy off and get one on this side. But I wanted to show you that, just be aware. That's kind of the reason that Axial uses Phillips heads there, because they're able to get these guys super flat. And I mean, that's almost hitting the hex. Maybe not, I guess. Once you get in there, it's getting pretty close. So we'll just throw a little washer on there. And hopefully that's enough just to kind of offset it a little. Maybe we'll do 2. We're going to do 2 on each side, I think. Actually, we'll do 1, see if it hits. Oh, it's just barely touching. It's not actually stopping it, though. And that's only if you push in, because there's a little bit of side-to-side play, in and out play on these, just a tiny bit. See that? So we'll leave it for now. That should be enough. Let me go ahead and plug it in and try. We'll try. Let's turn it on. All right. Seems fine. I don't hear it hitting. Yeah, we're good. We're good. See if you can see the under and overdrive. We've got the stocks in the front. Ooh, hold on. There we go. Stock in the front. Oh yeah, you can definitely tell. Here, I'll mark it for you so you can see easily. So you can see our silver marks. Bam. One rotation, 50% overdrive, or underdrive, if you will. So we're going to have ridiculous steering. The steering radius here is already very sharp, very good. The website doesn't mention what kind of angle of degree that is, but that looks like it's at least 45, maybe more. I'm looking right here. That's pretty dang good. 48, 51, 51? Like I heard somewhere there 51. I don't know. Either way, pretty damn good. And then when you include the overdriven front, it's going to be nice. All right, see how we sit with our body, and then we'll go driver. So it looks like we're sitting pretty raked. You can see the front. When I pick it up, we got full droop, and then when I put it down, the front kind of drops down a little bit. I like that on the rear, but our springs are really stiff. So I think I'm going to have to chop some coils off. We don't have any softer springs, but at least chopping the coils, which doesn't change the spring stiffness, will at least drop it down. We'd like it to sit right about here. Not fully compressed, but about that much, right? Where this would be the normal. And then we'd be able to really articulate. I wish I would have gotten those shock mounts up there. Kind of hard to see in there. But gotten them a little higher, but they're basically touching the bed at this point. So yeah, can't really get it much lower without dropping the springs. We're not going to completely remove them. I just want to chop them down and so that it drops. Maybe we'll stretch them just a little bit, chop them and stretch them just to get it so we sit right about there. That'd be a good height. So we're going to go ahead and find the end of our spring here. See the end, and we're just going to go count a number of coils in. There's 1 coil and 2 coils, and we're going to go right where that spring would sit at the end and chop it at the same spot, 2 coils down. Okay, go ahead and pull that out. And now we'll go ahead and set it down and we'll see how we sit. You're not going to be able to tell from that angle here. So there you go. You can see we already sit a little lower. I think I may take 1 more coil off. So we'll be 3 coils. And there you go. Now you can see it's quite a bit of a difference there. And once we chop this, it'll drop it down to about here, which overall will lower us quite a bit. Boom, there we go. We've got some droop now. And we haven't stretched the springs yet. They're just chopped down. But I'm digging it overall. Basically got the stance and the sit that I want. And then just a little bit of droop. When you lift it up, you can see them drop down. That's your droop. Full droop means that they're fully compressed, and then when you pick it up, they drop all the way fully. But we don't really like full droop. We want some sort of suspension going on. Springs help keep your wheels down and they give you traction. So you're not relying just on the weight of your axles. You also have you have the whole truck. It helps stability and it helps consistency and predictability to have springs. So that's where we're at. We're digging it. Alrighty, let's go drive it. And there we have it, the Mofo X15s. Pretty straightforward install, no major issues, easy swap for just even a stock truck, just to throw them on to any SCX24 really, and I think it's going to definitely help your performance. That steering angle is huge. The fact they come underdriven is pretty nice. I almost wonder if 50% is too much. We might end up having to put something else in the front. Maybe we'll do like a 20% underdrive in the front. That way we have 50 underdrive in the rear, 20 in the front, or whatever options are out there, but not quite 50, because I still want that differentiation between wheel speed. I just wonder if it's too much with 50%, because I did feel like sometimes I was dragging the rear a little bit more than I would like. It also just depends on your setup, the type of terrain you're on, stuff like that. I do still like that they came with the underdrive, even 50%. I'd rather have that than the stock gears in there, for sure. In worst case, I could just put this the Mofo gear back in the front and not have any underdrive, but we really want some underdrive. So, like I said, maybe a 20% underdrive, and that'll give us a 30% difference. All in all, though, no real issues during the install, other than the hex head screws that are used on the rear. That's why Axial uses Phillips heads, because they can get them flat, and you don't have to worry about it hitting on your wheels. So we just had to add a little bit of a spacer on these specific wheels. Your wheels may be fine, but just something to be aware of when you install. Don't just install your wheels and tires and go. Like, definitely check to make sure you're not hitting on anything, and you've got plenty of clearances in there. But other than that, everything was great. No issues with the steering links or the knuckles or the servo or any of that kind of stuff. Like I said, the servo tray is a little bit wide, just a little bit, so you may have to trim your rails to avoid rubbing or hitting too bad, depending on how your truck sits. You could also Dremel down the sides of the servo tray. I don't know why the ears are so much wider than the other tray we had, but it's probably the same dimensions as the BSME from Mofo, so if you have that, it should be the same width. So no worries there. Again, the axles are really meant for not a stock rig, right? Like, they're so good, you're going to run them on higher class rigs, not just a stock truck. Not that this is a stock truck, but when you upgrade, you usually expect to have to make adjustments and modifications to make things work. But again, not much for the Mofos, so freaking awesome. Love the larger bearings in the knuckles and all that stuff. The front steering link, how it raises, is super nice. It's kind of rounded. That's awesome as well. And again, just beefier in general. So definitely check these guys out. Thanks for sticking around. I know this was a long one, kind of went on some tangents with the shocks and whatnot, but I figure people like to see that stuff and just learn in case they run into issues that are similar, and just kind of shows you that sometimes, it takes some work to get stuff to work how we want, right? Depending on the type of truck and whatnot. So yeah. Cool thing about the hobby, you can go as deep as you want, modify as much as you want, and make all kinds of cool stuff, right? I definitely appreciate all the channel members that have been members for a while here. You can see them. They get priority viewing on all the videos. They get to see them before there's any ads or anything like that. They also get priority comment replies. So if they make a comment or have a question, I see it immediately because they're a channel member. It gives me a notification. So I'm able to reply to them quickly. Also the highest tier, you get stickers and stuff like that. Also, whenever we do a giveaway, which we should be doing a giveaway soon, when we hit 10,000 subs, we're going to give away a under $200 mini RTR. So whatever you want to choose, if you want a mini Z, a mini B, a TRX4M, an SCX24, you name it, as long as it's under $200, you can pick it up. Even the FearTech FX118 brushless. All that stuff is on the table for whoever wins. Usually channel members get a little bit of extra entries based on their channel membership, but there's also other ways for people to enter into that giveaway. One of them's having swag. You get extra points if you send in a picture with you wearing swag or stickers on your truck. So if you've got a truck with stickers, get ready to take some pictures and send them in for the giveaway. Anyway, guys, I appreciate all the viewers, even the subs and the non-subs. All you guys are awesome. You make the channel possible. And tell me down in the comments below your thoughts on the Mofo X15s. Yeah, why don't we put down in the comments, get some Mofo. Yeah, get some Mofo. Put that down in the comments, and then get out there and build something awesome, guys. Build a car, build a course, build a community, smash it, crash it, bash it, but don't break the expensive parts. Peace.